Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. We are just meeting people, but I think we can already start. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to another webinar organized by European Heat Pump Association. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Francesca Tamburrini. I am a EU Project Officer at the EHPA. And the event of today is about the conclusion on Fit for 55, renewable heating and cooling solution. And we are going to have an overview of the topic with the different policy experts that are here with us today. But before saying more, I will show you the agenda of today. And I also tell you that we are recording the events. So you will also find the recording once we're going to upload it on our YouTube channel. And you can rewatch it and share with your contact. So the agenda of today, okay, I will give a quick introduction about the event. Then we will have an opening statement from Greg Arrowsmith from EUREC. Then we will have a series of presentations from our different speakers, and a panel discussion at the end of all the presentation that will be moderated by Greg. And around 12 or 5 minutes before 12, we are going to conclude the event. Just some technical tips. Unfortunately, you are not able to switch on your camera and your microphone, but you are still able to write in the chat. So for any questions, any doubt, you want to ask clarification to the speakers, please add it directly in the chat, maybe tagging the person you want to ask the question to. And we are going to take care of them, and we are going to highlight the question to the speakers. And so before giving the floor to our speakers, I want just to give you a context of this webinar. It's organized in the framework of the European funded project REDI4Heat, which is funded by a LIFE program. The project officially started in October 2022, and it will run for 3 years. With the aim of accelerate the share of renewables for heating and cooling by identifying national policy gaps and proposing effective strategies. We have here also another representative of another European funded project, the European Technology and Innovation Platform, or Renewable Heating and Cooling, REDI4Heat, and with the aim of bringing together stakeholders from biomass, geothermal, solar thermal sector, heat pump, district heating, including the related industries, to define a common strategy for increasing the use of renewable energy technologies for heating and cooling, and also to foster the growth and the market uptake of the technologies. So we thought it would be a nice idea to put together these two projects. The webinar of today is going to explore an important legislative package launched already in 2021 by the European Union, called the Fit for 55, which aims to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. We know this is a very ambitious target, and it requires a significant shift towards renewable energy sources and also the electrification of various sectors, especially if we consider that heating and cooling at the moment accounts for approximately 50% of the final energy consumption in the European Union, and most of this energy is still produced from fossil fuels. So to tackle this issue, the Fit for 55 package includes a range of measures to support the transition to a more sustainable system and a carbon neutral economy. So during this webinar, we're going to cover all the relation between the legislative packages and the various renewable heating and cooling solutions that are here, including heat pump, thermal, solar, geothermal, heating and cooling district, and biomass, because we know that they are expected to play a really crucial role in achieving the EU emission reduction targets, because they are going to provide the low carbon alternatives to fossil fuels-based heating and cooling system. And we're going to do it through the expertise and the insights of our speakers. So we really hope that by the end of this webinar, you will have a better understanding of the implication of the Fit for 55 packages, the Renewable Energy Directive, Energy Efficiency Directive, and much more. And yeah, so before we deep dive into the presentation, I really just want to thank the speaker who have made this webinar possible. And yeah, I think that we can start. So the first speaker of today, I'm happy to introduce you, is Greg Aerosmith. He's the Secretary General of EUREC, the Association of European Renewable Energy Research Centers, since 2020. EUREC coordinates the Secretariat of the RHC ETIP, which includes also some REDI4Heat partners. Greg has 2 decades of experience in EU policy on energy and the research and development, promoting the cause of renewable energy and the technology to support its integration into the energy system. And he is also part of the expert group of Innovation Fund and of the steering committee of the ETIP PV. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about one specific provision of the Renewable Energy Directive that we were particularly keen to see retained in the text that emerged from the negotiations between the Council and the European Parliament. And it concerns the place of innovative renewable energy technology. And what we managed to get out of the deal, summarized on this picture that was tweeted by the rapporteur after marathon discussions late one night, is that innovative technology should account for 5% of all the new renewable energy technology which is installed between now and 2030. So it's a target that relates to the capacity that's going to be installed. Thanks also to RHC ETIP for supporting us with this campaign. Let me then tell you a little bit about what innovative may mean. So the target is one side of the story. The other side of the story is what is covered by it. And what we have on the screen is the text ultimately agreed between the institutions. And you've got 3 notions in there. You've got the fact that an innovative technology improves on an existing one. Also, that it is not fully commercialized. And finally, that it has a clear degree of risk in it. And you might notice that all of those words are connected by, well, the 3 key ideas in there are connected by or. So it can be one of these things or the other or the other. That makes the definition rather wide, perhaps a little bit wider than we would like. And we're going to be trying to work with the Commission for the spirit of the amendment to be listened to and acted upon by the member states rather than the letter of it. It's not the only amendment the only definition which is knocking around at the moment for what innovative means. There's another one in the Net Zero Industry Act, which is rather hard to understand because of a strange section in the middle here that talks about a technology not reaching a level of at least something, which holds open every level above that. So it's not perfect either. I think that we need to work in general on definitions of innovative in the coming months. So what are we trying to do with our amendments? Well, we're trying to help technology which has managed to make it out of the starting blocks. So it's not something which is directed at the very first demonstration projects. It's more directed at the early adopters, technologies which are just beginning to climb, perhaps exponentially, up a curve which indicates their dominance in the market. And they will be, as they do this, trying to navigate the valley of death. What we're aiming to do is not to see new programs put in place by member states to reach this target, which are a very high aid intensity. It would be unaffordable. So it's not about another program like Innovation Fund or about Horizon Europe, where aid intensities of maybe 40 to 50 to 60% can be given to projects. What we're much more about is technologies which are needing a little bit of a push to get further. So they're already somehow present on the market, but not really there. And they need to have some kind of provisions just to give them a bit of a leg up. These provisions might equate to something like 5–10% of capex if they were going to be expressed in monetary terms. And quick slide then to summarize what I just said. We're all here about what it's all about is about industry. It's an amendment which is not trying to create new R&D projects directly. It's a measure which aims to nurture the EU industry in renewables. And what you'll see on the next slides as I race through them is that we think if the EU is going to try to re-establish itself in renewable energy technology, it has to look at high performance and innovative technology. That is where it has a specific advantage compared to low-cost manufacturers and technology producers in other parts of the world. So I will not be spending too much on these. We can all read and we all have a good look at the various press cuttings which pile up. So I click through these fairly quickly. It's not a new idea to say that industry strategy should be built on an appreciation of where Europe has a competitive advantage and that is in innovative technologies. Sometimes when I speak to policymakers, they're very interested to hear about jobs, and it's quite easy to find stats about jobs created by the installation of technologies. There are hundreds of thousands of new jobs that are needed for putting new kit into the energy system. If we're talking about innovative renewables, then we're talking about perhaps white-collar jobs, talking about highly qualified people. This information is a little bit harder to find than the headcount that you need. For PV, there is some data available. I think the last bullet of this slide is the interesting one. Each gigawatt of new manufacturing capacity in PV equates to around 1,000 jobs, and there may be some equivalent calculations made by the heating and cooling sector. This slide aims to show what kind of increase in capacity may be expected for renewable heating and cooling technologies between 2021 and 2030. And consider this as only a rule of thumb for me to be able to give you a rough idea about what 5% of the new capacity coming for renewable heating and cooling might look like. The difference between these two stacks is roughly 400 gigawatts. So we're looking to add around about 400 gigawatts of new renewable heating and cooling capacity in a bit less than a decade. 5% of that would be 20 gigawatts. Where is that capacity mainly going to come? You can see the turquoise slab at the top, and underneath that, a yellow one. The projections by the people who did this study, TU, Wien and RF back in August, is that the capacity increases will mainly come in heat pumps and in solar thermal. So I was talking about innovative technology. What are these specifically? For solar thermal, we could be thinking especially about the integration of low temperature or medium temperature solar thermal into industry. This requires a tailored approach pretty much for every single factory. So it's something which a lot of people need to get very comfortable with. And at least the first few gigawatts of those kind of installations, and perhaps also the first few gigawatts of solar district heating, could be considered innovative. For heat pumps, I've got 3 bullet points there, which I've taken from a description in the Horizon Europe work programme of a possible tender that the Commission might launch to support heat pumps based on the heat pump accelerator, which I think Josephine is going to be telling us a bit about later. And for bioenergy, a standout technology from the Repower EU strategy is biomethane. So I would think that with the doubling of biomethane production capacity expected, or called for at least in the next 10 years, we would see innovative technologies in that area. And for geothermal, the consultants that we hired felt that ORC and deep geothermal technologies were both areas with ripe for innovation, and the geothermal sector itself, EJEC, we'll hear from Sanjeev in a moment, awards innovation in geothermal. I put on here an illustration of multi-drain wells. An innovation like this, I think, would eminently qualify, especially if rolled out at scale over several sites as a contribution to the 5% target. A couple of slides to conclude about how we might implement such an innovative target for innovative technology. Well, it requires a lot of monitoring. It requires something like a list of technologies to be drawn up from the guideline that I mentioned at the front of my presentation. I think that member states are going to have to consult their scientific communities on what could fit this definition that the trilogue has thrown up, and then try to push them towards more ambition and not allow too many things to get through the filter. We have the NECP process that runs every 5 years to come up with a list of technologies this year and next. That's because of a chance bit of good luck with the timing. NECPs have to be redone by June of 2024. There's also a process every 2 years to monitor that progress, which could help to keep a list of innovative technologies up to date. And in the slide set that that we distributed to you after the presentations today, in this diagram on the right, you have me referring to the SET plan, which is a pre-existing discussion between member states and the Commission on what constitutes innovation in energy, and the permanent group that sits in this SET plan could also be a channel to provide input in the ideas and an up-to-date list of technologies and ideas for measures to support them. And in a moment, I'm going to add in the chat our links to our 2 key reports on this area. We put them out at the kind of start of the last quarter of last year. One with going into detail about the principle, about why it's useful, and the second one which looks at what specific technologies could contribute to roughly, let's say, 50 gigawatts if you look at electricity and heating and cooling technologies. What technologies could count towards that kind of amount that would need to be installed by 2030. That, therefore, is the end of my statement, and I think we're now going to dive much more into depth with specific heating and cooling areas.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, Greg, for your presentation. I think it's really interesting to deep dive in what do we mean with innovation, and thanks for advancing already the innovative technologies that we're going to see during this webinar. So I would like to give the floor to Josephine, but before I'm going to just quickly introduce her. She's one of my colleagues at the EHPA, and she works for 4 years at the Organization for Sustainable Energy, the Flemish Heat Pump Association, which is also a member of EHPA. Before that, she worked at the Friends of the Supergrid, an EU association representing the electricity transmission sector. She did an internship in the DG Energy of the European Commission and at the Belgian Embassy in Berlin, where she oversaw the German energy event. And she has a master from the College of Europe in Bruges, where she studied European political and administrative studies. And she also has a master in international relations and diplomacy, and a master in German and Scandinavian linguistics and literature, never-ending studies. And so, Josephine, thank you very much for being here. And yeah, please take the floor.
Thank you. I took control and I managed to unmute, I think. Yes. So let me know if, yeah, okay.
Yes,
Thank you, Francesca. It's a long time ago. I heard my whole CV again. Interesting. Okay. So thank you as well, Greg, for highlighting the innovative aspects in the Renewable Energy Directive. So I will focus, as mentioned, on the heat pump aspect. So first, I'm going to give a bit more of a general introduction on the market developments, and then link it to the Fit for 55 and also future developments. So first of all, the heat pump market has been growing for the past years, but especially last year in 2022, we've seen a very remarkable growth, so an increase of 38%, and now we are at a heat pump stock of 20 million, 19.9 million heat pumps, and last year 3 million were added. You also see this growth specifically in the member states. For example, in Poland, we had an increase of 101%. In the Czech Republic, an increase of 99%. In the Netherlands of 80%. So you really see also at national level that there's really a big growth in heat pumps. But even though this growth, that's very good, we still see that the sales of heat pumps versus the classic fossil fuel boiler sales, there's still a big difference. So if you look at the heat pumps only, because the 3 million I mentioned before is both heating and sanitary hot water, that's 3 million, but heat pumps only, that's 2.7. If you compare that to 7 million boilers, yeah, there's still a gap to fill, so to say. So there's still work. So at the moment, we have a stock of 17.8 million heat pumps. So again, this 20 million that I mentioned before, it's both heating and sanitary hot water. If we only look at heat pumps, we are at 17.8 million, and they supply approximately 15% of all buildings. So again, to put numbers in perspective. 2022 was really the tipping point for heat pumps. I see that the slides have changed a bit, the layout. So let's hope the next ones are looking good. So yeah, the biggest change we have indeed seen last year. And that's, of course, as you all know, a consequence of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, where the EU, but also internationally, people wanted to reduce our reliance on Russian fossil fuels. And for example, the IEA made this 10-point plan to reduce the EU's reliance on Russian natural gas, and heat pumps were really key measures that were mentioned in there. Also, the EU, of course, reacted to that with this Repower EU plan, where for the first time, really, heat pumps were really put in the picture, literally. And also in the document, there were ambitious targets for heat pumps and also measures, some measures spread out targeting heat pumps. So the targets that were mentioned in the document were to have 30 million additional hydronic heat pumps by 2030. But if we extrapolate these hydronic heat pumps to, this number to the whole heat pump market, because it's not only hydronic heat pumps, you also have a lot of, for example, air-to-air heat pumps, then we would arrive at 60 million additional heat pumps by 2030, which is actually a quadrupling of the current stock. So this is very ambitious targets. If I then go to the Fit for 55 package, so we had last year these very ambitious targets, but of course, in the meantime, the Fit for 55 package was already ongoing, the negotiations were ongoing, so we have to see a bit these things separate from each other, and we have to see in how far will the measures included in the Fit for 55 package actually contribute to these targets, because they were not setting the targets. And the first one is very important for us. That's the ETS2, so the emission trading systems for building and road transport, which put a carbon price on fossil fuels used in buildings and road transport. That will enter into force as of 2027. It can be delayed to 2028, but that's very important for us that the polluter pays principle is also much more integrated into heating, and that a carbon price is put onto these onto the most emitting fuels used for heating. So that will also make the gap between renewable heating and other heating smaller, and make the business case better for heat pumps. At the same time, a social climate fund will be set up, so the money from the ETS will be also used to support vulnerable households to make also that shift from fossil fuel heating to renewable heating. So that's very important as well. Then a second important legislation is, of course, the Renewable Energy Directive, and some measures that are important for us are that the target has been added for renewable energy in buildings. Of course, you have the renewable energy target in heating and cooling, which is now binding, but for us, it's still too low. You will also have to take into account the renewable electricity that is used for heating. There, we are not yet sure what the effect will be and how this will be calculated in detail, so that we will have to see if more technical guidelines and so on follow, but that will have an implication as well, of course, for our sector. And then there is the prioritization of electrification and more renewable energy sources in low and medium industrial processes up to 200 degrees. That's, of course, very important as well, to also transform the industry to using more renewables in heating. And then we have the Energy Efficiency Directive. The energy efficiency first principle was put much stricter, which is, of course, also very important for heat pumps because they are such an efficient heating technology. Then there's stricter criteria for efficient district heating and cooling. I'm sure Andres will talk more about that, but that's of course also very good for large heat pumps, for example, because they will be used more and more as input for district heating and cooling. Then there will be obligations for data centers to use their waste heat, because data centers have a lot of excess heat, and by having a clear plan, or by being obliged to use that, for example, to heat the buildings in the surroundings, more heat pumps will be used, and also most important, this will be much more energy efficient and there will be less wasted heat. And then also energy savings from fossil fuel combustion cannot count towards the energy efficiency obligation schemes anymore. That's important because in the past it was often very divided. I would say the Renewable Energy Directive was about renewables, energy efficiency only about efficiency, but by also saying that more efficient fossil fuel combustion cannot count towards the energy savings obligations anymore. It reinforces each other. So I think that's an important message as well. On the next slide, of course, a very important file for us is also the Energy Performance of Building Directive. Here the trilogues will start in the coming weeks. And for us, we have 3 key recommendations. First of all, that there needs to be clarity on the phase out of fossil fuel boilers and the rollout of heat pumps, because right now in the position of the Parliament, there's 2 articles, Article 7 and 8, where it's mentioned that fossil fuel boilers that are certified to run on renewables would not be seen as fossil fuel boilers. So for us, this is really a loophole opening to keep installing fossil fuel boilers, because they have some type of label that maybe someday in the future they will use a renewable fuel. So this is very, for us, this is key that this is taken out, because it would also mean a lock-in of fossil fuels. Then a second part is, of course, to make heat pumps a logic choice in zero-emission buildings. Now, in the zero-emission buildings definition, renewable energy from the grid is a bit seen as a last option, whereas if you really want to stimulate heat pumps, you also need to allow them to use renewable energy from the grid as a driver, as a driving energy. And then, of course, use the correct heat pump definition, but that's more of a formality to correct some details in the definition. So these negotiations, yeah, they are starting in a few weeks. So that's very important for us, and we are following that up. And then, of course, as I said, these targets mentioned in the Repower EU, there we really saw that, okay, you have the Commission proposed these ambitious targets in the Repower EU package, and they had some measures spread out throughout the 12 documents actually that were part of this Repower EU plan. But for us, it was not enough, because if you have such an ambitious target, you also need to show, ambitious measures, a clear, straightforward way on how to achieve them, and really concerted action of policymakers, industry, and other stakeholders together. And that's why we proposed a heat pump accelerator focusing on 5 key areas where actions are needed. So first of all, clean heating should become the standard with long-term policy signals. So really moving away from technology neutrality, but really being very clear for investors, also for manufacturers, for example, also our own members. Many of them are still producing both fossil fuel boilers and heat pumps. And by clearly saying heat pumps are the future or the presence already, that these manufacturers would shift, for example, their production lines away from fossil fuel boilers to heat pumps. Secondly, support for the EU industrial leadership is needed. There we see also that heat pumps are taken up in the Net Zero Industry Act, so that's very important as well. Then thirdly, we have to invest in grids and flexibility, and also look at system integration and think much more in terms of thermal systems, again, to take up this excess heat and to not have this wasted. Fourthly, we need to develop an enabling framework for consumers, and there it's mostly about informing consumers and also about the pricing. For example, having targeted subsidies for low-income households. And then the last point is to develop, of course, the required skills and workforce. I think that's something that is needed for all of our sectors. If we have this huge transition, then of course we need to have the people to install and develop these solutions. So this was a proposal we made. So we had a first kickoff meeting with a group of stakeholders in February, and then we developed this accelerator, and now we are finalizing it, and we will have a launch event in June. But what is very good is that in the meantime, this has been taken up by the European Commission. They endorsed this idea, and they have now developed the idea for a heat pump action plan. So they launched the call for evidence on the heat pump action plan a few weeks ago. The deadline is the 26th of May. And then after that, a public consultation will start in June. It will run over 12 weeks over the summer. And then the action plan will be published by the end of the year. So many of the proposals that we are making in the framework of the accelerator are now being endorsed and taken up also by the Commission in this heat pump action plan. So that's, very good. And the launch event, as I mentioned, will be on the 7th of June. On the 6th of June, we have the handover to Commissioner Simpson. And then indeed, all these actions proposed there will feed into this action plan also in the next steps of the Commission process. So that was it from my side. You have a last slide with a bit more information, also EHPA. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the other speakers and the discussion.
Thank you very much, Josephine. It was a really interesting overview. I think that it's incredible to see this number and the ambitious targets that the heat pump sector now has set. And we will stay tuned, because I think that many things are coming, and also the negotiation are going to start soon. So yeah, let's stay tuned. And now I would like to introduce, Andreas. Okay, you are ready to control. Perfect. I'm going just to say a couple of words about our next speaker. So Andreas is an environmental engineer. He began his career working for the Greens EFA group in the European Parliament, where he was working on energy and industry related to EU legislation. His academic background, coupled with his experience in EU policy, paved the road for him to work at the Heat and Power. not only to represent the interest of the district heating and cooling sector, but also to help steering the industry towards greener and more sustainable directions. His expertise is currently focused on Fit for 55, and as well as exploring the potential of renewable waste heat and promoting the flexibility and balancing service of district heating and cooling services systems. And yeah, Andreas, if you want to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And for everyone before me speaking, very interesting presentations. So I am here representing Euroheat and Power, which is an international association for sustainable district heating and cooling. We have members from all over Europe and even abroad. We are the voice of the research and innovation institutions, and we are collecting different technologies which are connected to district heating and cooling. We have more than 150 members, and just this week we had already 2 new members joining, one from one manufacturing large-scale heat pumps and the other one pipes. So we have very broad membership from all over the supply chain of district heating and cooling. I will not waste more time on this. So as everyone here knows, this heating is using a lot of energy in the EU. It consumes half of the EU's energy, as you can see here on the chart. This is what Francesca said in the beginning of the meeting, but here you can see on pictures, so maybe it helps there. So I said half of EU's consumption is used for heating, space heating, and also water heating. Most of it is used in households, nearly 70%, and also services and yeah, public services, and only 7% of the heat is consumed in industries. And currently, more than 40% of the energy mix is made by natural gas. And overall, currently only 23% is covered by renewable energy sources. In district heating and cooling, we are around 33%. So we are improving the overall share of the energy mix. So about district heating and cooling in EU, we have more than 10,000 heat networks, and we are covering 13% of the EU heat markets. We are delivering heat to 68 million citizens, and in cities where we already have district heating and cooling grids, we could cover 140 million citizens. So that's a huge number. As you can see on the picture, district heating is not a technology, it's a solution which utilizes many different technologies. We can utilize solar thermal, geothermal, also heat pumps using renewable electricity, and many different. Here on the picture, there is not even mentioned waste heat from services, only from industrial plus heat. So we have many sources what we can deliver to households. As previously mentioned, 1/3 of our energy mix is renewable and waste heat. So we have still where to evolve, and for that we have our decarbonisation toolbox, which stands on 3 strong pillars. And the first one is to recover heat, waste heat from industries and the services, and this could provide up to 25% of the future district heating energy mix. Besides that, we can diversify the heating sector using geothermal, solar thermal, biomethane sources. So the whole heating sector will not stand only on electricity and electrifying the heating sector, but also on different energy sources. And the third option is, of course, renewable electricity used by heat pumps or e-boilers. Here we have a big opportunity that we could balance the electricity grid and use excess renewable electricity when there is a lot of production, and we can use that use excess electricity by heat pumps and e-boilers and store it in thermal storages. These thermal storages can store heat for days or even seasons. So, for example, during the day when the sun is shining, the thermal storage will store heat from solar thermal and other electricity sources, because of the renewable electricity is more produced during the day from solar thermal, for example, and feed it into the district heating grid during the evenings. To do this, we to properly use thermal storage, we also need digitalization. We need resources and data about weather forecast, for example, to know that when will be the temperature so low that we have to heat up our thermal storages the days before. And to utilize all of this, we need low temperature district heating and cooling systems, but also buildings which are ready to receive low temperature. So there is a lot to do, but we are ready for it. And the Fit for 55 package helped us to reach our goals. We had, similarly to EHPA, these 4 legislations important for us. And as you can see, the EED, RED, and the ETS is already finalized. It still has to be formally adopted, and the negotiations on EPPD will start in few weeks in the trialogues. Yes, so I will start with RED, but I will be short because I know that this file is important for all of the other speakers as well. So besides the overall renewable energy targets of 42.5, we have sub-targets which includes not only renewables but also waste, and this is huge for us because we are utilizing waste heat, excess heat, and it will come towards all of these targets. There is a binding target for heating and cooling, which will increase later. Also, there is an indicative target for district heating and cooling, 2.2% yearly. And then there, as already Craig mentioned, there is an innovative renewable energy technology target as well, and targets for buildings and industry. So the outcome of the RED was very positive. We are happy with it. There is a few very positive aspects what I am going to mention. We are happy that third-party integration is allowed, and network operators above 25 megawatt-hour, they will be encouraged to connect third-party supplies of heating and cooling. So if there will be a geothermal well close to a district heating network, then they will be encouraged to connect to it. Similarly, there is broader information requirements for consumers, so they will be informed about the energy performance and the renewable share of the district heating cooling network, and all of this information will be accessible for them. And as already mentioned, waste heat is very well recognized through the legislation, and it comes towards the targets as well. So on EED, I will start with the biggest win. From June 2024, comprehensive heating and cooling assessments should be integrated into the National Energy and Climate Plans, which is very good news, because that will mean that heating and cooling will be considered from the very beginning of the planning for the national energy and climate plans. Other stakeholders affected by the assessments will be included in the development of this assessment. And through the assessment, the energy efficiency first principle has to be respected. And also they have to identify the application of higher efficiency cogeneration and also have to utilize waste heat. So it will be encouraged as well. Then there is a new article as well, which mandates that every municipality above 45,000 inhabitants will have to develop a local heating and cooling plan, which means that the cities have to map that in which areas is the heat demand and what heating sources they have within the municipality. So as you can see on the picture on the right, there is urban wastewater treatment plants, which could be used for the waste heat could be used, but also nearby to the city there could be a geothermal well, which could be connected to high efficiency cogeneration or a heat pump. So anyway, the city has to map all of these, the demands and also the energy sources what they have, and they have to develop these local heating and cooling plans. And now about the efficient district heating and cooling definition. There are two of them. The other alternative definition is based on the CO2 emissions, and maybe it will be important, useful for member states which are choosing other decarbonization pathways. But the main one is this, which sets clear pathway and targets through up until 2050. You can see that until 2028, member states can choose all of these three options. For example, if they want to fulfill the first criteria, they have 50% renewable energy or 50% waste heat in their district heating and cooling grids, or they can use 75% at least cogeneration, or they can mix together and 50% combined renewable waste heat and CHP. But from 2028, CHP will be not allowed to count towards the efficient district heating definition, but only I think the text is covering a bit, but only high efficient cogeneration. And from 2028, there will be a minimum share of renewables in the networks. So from 2028 is 5%, from 2035 it's 35%, and the 35% stays, but the overall share is increasing, which includes high efficiency cogeneration as well. And of course, from 2050, we will run only 100% on renewable energy and or waste heat. So the timeline, just to repeat, so from 2024 June, comprehensive heating assessments will kick in, and also in the meanwhile, it depends when the directive will be transposed into national legislations. So according to Annex 3, cogeneration will have to limit its emissions to 270 grams to become high efficiency cogeneration. So here the date is not completely clear yet. And from 2028, only high efficiency cogeneration can count towards the efficient district heating and cooling definition. From 2031, no new fossil fuels will be allowed in district heating and cooling grids. This means that up until 2030, natural gas can be used for new installations, new energy sources of district heating and cooling, which are efficient district heating and cooling. But after 2031, it will be not allowed within the definition of efficient district heating and cooling. Here I want to mention that there will be fossil fuel district heating and cooling networks after 2031, but they will be not classified as efficient, and hence that they will not receive any support from EU or the member states. So this is the consequences of it. From 2035, all existing CHP will have to comply with the 270 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour threshold, and from 2045, high efficiency cogeneration is not longer accountable for efficient district heating and cooling definition, but cogeneration using renewables or hydrogen will be still there and provide flexibility and balancing services to not only to the electricity grid, but heat for the district heating network. And of course, from 2050, only renewable. I have just one quick slide on ETS, and I will just highlight that from 2027, fossil fuel combustion in buildings will fall under ETS2, together with road transport. This may be postponed by 1 year if the energy prices are high. Yesterday I checked, the ETS price was 89 euros, so probably it will exceed 90 euros, and this emergency brake will be triggered, which means that ETS2 will kick in from 2028 only. Prices for households will be kept for buildings at 45 euro at least until 2030. This will be reviewed by the Commission every 12 months. And there will be a social climate fund which will help, as Josephine already mentioned, households to cope with the extra costs. We know that this ETS for buildings is very sensitive, and even now with the energy crisis we have and the energy prices increasing, this means that households will have to pay higher prices for the heat what they receive, but yeah, this will drive the decarbonisation of the sector. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for the discussion after the speakers.
Thank you very much, Andres. It was very interesting to have an overview on district heating and cooling solutions. And yeah, we see that many stakeholders will be touched by the measures, so we really need them to make an effort to respect the targets and yeah, to reduce the emission. Okay, I think that we can go on with the next speaker. So yes, we have here with us Saverio. Thank you very much for joining us. So Saverio, just to introduce him, he studied international relations and European studies in Italy and the UK. After completing his studies, he moved directly to Brussels, where he developed a solid expertise on climate, sustainability, and regional policy at the EU level. He joined Solar Heat Europe in June 2022 as a junior policy officer, and he's now in charge of policy monitoring and analysis, as well as the related advocacy activities to ensure that the solar heat is represented in the EU policies. So thank you, Saverio. Please take control and go on.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca, for the presentation. So indeed, I will start by quickly presenting the association, Solar Heat Europe, and the sector, and then I will move on to the Fit for 55 package, and there I will try to complement what the other speakers have already presented. So just a few words about Solar Heat Europe. We are the European association representing the European solar thermal sector, so not just the industry, but also service providers, supporters, and the whole value chain. With approximately 40 members from 15 different countries, we represent approximately 90% of the EU market. Our main objective is, of course, to promote the benefits of solar heating and cooling, but also of renewable heating and cooling in general vis-a-vis EU policymakers and stakeholders. Here you have a snapshot of our members. Then just also a quick word about the solar technologies, because indeed we have different solar technologies. The big distinction is between solar power, so technologies that produce electricity, and here you can see solar photovoltaics and concentrated solar power, and technologies that produce heat, which are the ones that we represent. So there you have also concentrated solar for thermal, for heating and cooling, and then of course you have several other technologies, flat plate collectors, etc., to produce heating and cooling. We cover both small scale and large scale installations. Of course, the small scale segments are the dominant ones today. We have residential, commercial buildings, and we have over 10 million installations in Europe, to give you a quick reference. But we see that the large-scale installations are growing a lot. They are already present, of course. It's not a niche market, but we see that it's the one that will grow the fastest in the next years. Andras was already mentioning solar for district heating systems, so solar district heating. But we also have solar heat for industrial processes, which is also called SHIP. That's the acronym. Here you have a snapshot of the sector in Europe. I will only mention a few of the figures that you can see here. We have approximately 40 gigawatt thermal of installed capacity today in Europe, and 10 million installations, as I was saying. Just let me mention two of these figures. The first one is the approximately 20,000 workers in the sector. It's important because also Greg started talking about jobs in the renewable energy sector in his introduction. And here I would like to stress that these 20,000 jobs are direct jobs, so in manufacturing. That's why solar thermal has already an established and well-developed manufacturing capacity in Europe. So this figure doesn't take into account all the jobs related, for example, to installation or maintenance, which are for several renewable technologies. They are the bulk, let's say, of the jobs that one technology provides. And then the other figure that I would like to mention is the thermal energy storage, which is coupled with the solar thermal installations in Europe, which is approximately 200 gigawatt thermal. Why is this important? Because, as already some of the other speakers mentioned, thermal energy storage is a largely untapped potential for Europe. Thermal energy storage is not only important, of course, because it provides storage, but also because it has a role when integrated in the energy system to provide flexibility, also to balance the electricity grid. So it is important, it is crucial that policymakers at EU and national level start considering thermal energy storage as an asset and start considering it in their policies, because it's also one of the cheapest and easily available ways of storing energy. Moving on to the Fit for 55 package now. Since there were already other presenters and they have already presented most of the key elements of the Fit for 55 package. Just to clarify, I'm sure that most of you already know, but in July 2021, the European Union adopted the EU climate law, which established two headline targets. First, climate neutrality in the EU by 2050, and the second target is a reduction of 55% of the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Therefore, to meet these ambitious targets, the EU also put in place the policy measures that are needed through the Fit for 55 package, which was presented between July and December 2021. And it contains several proposals. Of course, we don't have the time and there's no need to go through all of them. But just to start with, I would like to mention the priorities of Solar Heat Europe once the package was published. We realized that these priorities were, First, higher and binding targets for renewable energy, not just the overall target for renewable energy, but also for specific sectors. So here we refer to heating and cooling, but also to subsectoral targets such as industry and buildings. Then a higher focus on heating and cooling, which is indeed the largest share of EU energy consumption, but it's often treated as a second zone, let's say, by EU and national policymakers because of a lack of competence, maybe, or because it's more of a local issue where local authorities have a lot to do. The third point was accelerating permitting, which is a major bottleneck for most renewable technologies. And finally, indeed, as I mentioned, local authorities are key for heating and cooling. So our fourth priority was to empower local authorities to decarbonize heating and cooling. As I mentioned, the Fit for 55 package included several proposals. Here I would like to focus only on three of them, and the Energy Efficiency Directive, also called the EED, the Renewable Energy Directive, RED, and finally the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, EPBD. Of course, these are not the only important files. My colleagues also mentioned the ETS, which is extremely relevant, but of course also due to time and also because the other presenters already said a lot about these proposals. I will try to just complement what they said and focus on these three, and most importantly on the Renewable Energy Directive. So here I hope it's big enough and you can see, but it's just to give you an idea of the timeline for these three files. So the Renewable Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, the proposals by the Commission were published in July 2021, and they moved, they went forward almost in parallel. The Energy Efficiency Directive is a bit earlier, but now we're close to adoption. The trilogue has ended for both files, and we're close to adoption for both. Whereas the EPBD, the proposal was published a bit later in December 2021, and therefore we're a bit of a later stage, and the trilogue is due to start next month in June 2023. Here we have the targets for the Renewable Energy Directive. They were already presented by the other speakers, so I will just quickly mention them and focus on faster permitting. We have Article 3 with the overall renewable energy target, which is now 42.5%, according to the agreement reached in trilogue, plus a 2.5% indicative top-up. It is important to say that this is already 10% higher than the previous goal. Of course, we must be ambitious if we want to meet climate neutrality, but also due to the energy crisis and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of course, the Commission had a reason also to a further reason, if we needed one, to push for higher targets. Then, importantly, the Article 23 has the target for renewables in heating and cooling. Here, as you can see, between 2021 and 2025, member states will have to put in place a 0.8 percentage points average increase, which will then become 1.1 between 2026 and 2030. The targets are not that high. They are close to a business as usual scenario, maybe. So they're not very ambitious in terms of quantity, but the very important thing is that it's finally a binding target, which is very relevant to force, maybe it's a bit of a hard word, but force member states to put in place policy measures to meet these targets. Because we have seen that indeed when the targets are indicative, unfortunately, some of the member states tend to underestimate them. So it is very relevant that these are now binding targets. And we will see what the policy measures are starting from the NSCP revision, but I will have a quick word about NECP's revision in my last slide. So then we have the article on district heating and cooling. Andras presented it very well, so I won't say much, just that it's very relevant that, of course, we push for more renewable energy in district heating and large-scale installations, because that's one of the keys to decarbonize the building stock and the heating and cooling sector. We have a new target for industry. It is and for buildings. These are indicative targets, but they are new articles. So it's important that the EU start putting on the table also these targets for subsectors. And finally, I will be just a bit longer. We have also provisions on faster to accelerate permitting and streamline permitting for renewable energy. This was one of the focus for the Commission last year. The Commission presented several initiatives on permitting, and it integrated most of the provisions that were included also in a council regulation, also in the Renewable Energy Directive. Here I will only mention 2 points. First is the introduction of so-called renewable acceleration areas, which are areas where, as the name says, renewable energy projects should have a faster permitting process. And here our priority, also for the heating and cooling sector in general, is that these renewable acceleration areas are identified also within or close to urban areas. That's because indeed permitting is one of the bottlenecks for, I don't know, for example, solar district heating installations. And that's for 2 reasons. First, permitting in general, but then there is an additional problem for renewable heating and cooling projects that are close to urban areas, which is close or within urban areas, land tend to be expensive and limited, because of course it's not as easy as finding land in the countryside. So renewable acceleration areas could help a lot in this sense. And the second point I want to mention is the permitting provisions for solar energy equipment. So there we have faster permitting processes for small-scale solar energy equipment that it's whose main aim is not to produce renewable energy. So basically for citizens and self-consumers. And there it's interesting that there is a cap, maximum 3 months for permitting for solar energy equipment and storage. And there is a deadline of 1 month for solar energy equipment, which is up to 100 kilowatt. Also with the introduction of a positive silence, positive administrative silence, which means that if the competent authority doesn't come back to the applicant, the permit should be considered automatically granted. I see that we're running late, so I will speed up. About the Energy Efficiency Directive, Article 23 was already mentioned, so I won't go into the details, but I will stress also in my last slide why it is extremely important that local authorities are pushed to put in place heating and cooling plans, but they are also enabled and empowered to do so, because it's not just about lack of willingness most of the time by local authorities, but it's just it's also a lot about lack of resources, not just financial, but also, for example, skills and workers. One last slide about the Fit for 55 package in the EPBD, and we said that the trilogue is upcoming and will start in June this year. Of course, the priority from our side is the introduction of a solar mandate. Article 9A was introduced last year in the proposal for the EPBD recast. And basically, here our priority, which is also stressed in the Council position and even more clearly in the Parliament position, is that the introduction of the solar mandate keeps the initial intention of the Commission, which is this mandate should refer to all solar technologies, and member states, when implementing the mandate, they should ensure that this mandate allows a level playing field between all solar technologies, which means solar thermal, solar PV, but also the combination of the two, which is also known as PVT. So my last slide, and I will conclude on this. National implementation is key. I'm happy to discuss it further during the Q&A. But as mentioned by Greg at the beginning, we have the ongoing revision of the NECPs. So member states must present their draft update by June this year. Then there will be 6 months for the Commission to present their inputs to member states so that the member states can present their final revision of NECPs in June 2024. Why is the national implementation key? Of course, first, because it must be timely and correct, and we already covered that. Also because it needs to ensure the compliance at national and local level. Indeed, in Article 23 of the EED, which was mentioned, and it introduces the mandate for local heating and cooling plans by municipalities, but it also contained already before, in the previous version, the requirement for member states to publish comprehensive assessments on heating and cooling. And there, unfortunately, we have noticed that not all member states published the updated version of these plans, regardless of the fact that this is a legal requirement. So we must ensure that member states take these requirements seriously and they put in place the needed planning to achieve the transition in the heating and cooling sector. So the NECPs will be a great opportunity to see what is the level of seriousness, let's say, how serious member states take this requirement, and if they are putting in place the adequate policy measures to meet the targets, and of course also to provide our feedback on this. But yeah, I see that we're late, so I'm happy to discuss this further in the Q&A part.
Thank you very much, Saverio. Yeah, I'm sure there will be more time to discuss it, but now I will present our next speaker, which is Irene Di Padova. She has a background and hands-on experience in EU public affairs and advocacy. Her professional career started in the sector of EU sustainability, first from a regional and industrial perspective, and then with a specific focus on the energy sector and renewable heat. In her role of policy director at Bioenergy Europe, she is now coordinating all the activities related to the bioenergy sector at the European and the international level. And yeah, please, the floor is yours, Irene. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to be sharing the screen with other fellow colleagues, because indeed we do agree on several of the points that were already mentioned, and that makes my work much easier now because I can focus on a few more specific issues. So indeed today I would like to give you an overview on the role of bioenergy in the Fit for 55, and in particular of bioheat in the Renewable Energy Directive. But before going into the details there, I would also like to spend a couple of words about Bioenergy Europe. Here you can see some of the other colleagues which are part of the team. We are the European Bioenergy Association based in Brussels, and we do advocate for a better policy framework for renewable heat solutions, including sustainable bioenergy. As today we have around 200 members. As you can see here, most of them are companies, but this also covers national association, research center, and academia. So all in all, we cover pretty much the full value chain for solid biomass in Europe. And here you can see some of the working groups that we have internally. These are usually only for our members, but of course we do allow for observers on a case-by-case situation. And here you can see how we cover from residential to industrial uses, feedstock, which can be woody biomass or agricultural biomass, but also innovative solutions such as carbon removals. So taking a step back, this was already mentioned before by other speakers, but if we think about energy, that doesn't only mean electricity. Actually, most of this comes from heating and cooling, almost half of what we consume in Europe. And as you can see from the external part of the circle, unfortunately, most of the heat is still supplied by fossil energy. The good news is that if we look at renewable heat, bioenergy is quite a key contributor. In 2019, it accounted for 160 million tons CO2 equivalent contribution that were saved, and is pretty much 85% of renewable heat as of today. But of course, we do hope to see this graph changing in the next few years to get more renewables, heating and cooling, more bioenergy, more solar thermal, geothermal, you name it. We have so many solutions that can fit there. Sorry. And here you can see the contribution of bioenergy sector in the different member states. As you can see, this really changes from Lithuania to Malta. The green part of the graph is bioenergy, while the blue one is all the other renewables. So here again, you can see how bioheat and bioenergy in general has quite a strong contribution in our decarbonization targets. But going to the main focus of today's discussion, if we look at the Fit for 55 package, this is a quite comprehensive set of policies. As you can see here, it touches upon very different sectors, from electricity to building to industry, transport. It's really different set of legislation, very important files. Some of the colleagues have already spoke about EED, EPBD, EU ETS. So today I will only focus on one of them, which for our sector is definitely the most important, which is the Renewable Energy Directive. And just to take a step back here again, if we talk about Renewable Energy Directive, the first discussion, oops, sorry, I think something went wrong with the PowerPoint. The first discussion only started a few years ago at the end of 1990s, where we were talking about renewable indicative target, and then more of renewable in the electricity field. And then more and more renewables in the heat sector came into the discussion and the conversation. And today I have to say it's quite an important topic, luckily, and this was also acknowledged by the Commission. But what you can see here, and I will very cut it short here, is that the pace of the European discussion, the legislation, has been quite increasing faster. Apologies for the background noise. I hope you cannot hear them. And so we got the Renewable Energy Directive in 2009, and then the revision of RED 2 in 2018. And now we're not only talking about RED 3, but we also had the RED 4 about permitting and a RED 5 considering the energy crisis. So things are moving on quite fast, showing a really higher and stronger ambition in terms not just of renewable, but also of renewable heat. And if we look at the timeline, indeed, the first proposal came from the Commission in July 2021, and it was discussed by the co-legislator. And now we finish with the trilogue 1.5 months ago at the end of March, where the co-legislator finally found an agreement. And what we heard, this slide is not updated, but I will change the dates for the disseminating it later, is that the Council will vote today in Coreper about the deal, and then on 19th of June, there should be the final vote, while the ITRE committee is expected to vote on RED next week, and then the plenary should adopt this in September, most likely in the session of the 11th, 14th of September. So all in all, we should have a finalized Renewable Energy Directive by October this year, or towards the end of the year. But why is, well, I wouldn't talk too much about the targets here, because I think I still have some issue with the PowerPoint, apologies. There's some technical problem. Okay, now it's going to bad. Okay, so I was saying that the other colleagues already talked about the targets. So we're really happy indeed to have mandatory targets for renewable heat, even though this is a bit lower than what we expected, and also to have subsectorial targets, in particular for renewables in district and in industry. Because as you can see on the bioheat sector, most of it is used in the residential aspect, but also, of course, in industrial and district heating sector. And other 2 points, which I think are really important for renewable heat solution in general, are, of course, the promotion and of the replacement of heating system, because the heating stock in Europe is quite old and inefficient, and also the fact that installers have a key role, especially for renewable heat solutions. So these are quite important points. But getting to bioenergy more specifically, Renewable Energy Directive is quite important because of sustainability criteria. And these are quite key. First of all, to be recognized as a renewable solution, to be eligible for public financial support, and also to have the zero rating accounting under the EU ETS system. There are several criteria. I will not spend too much time on this. This goes from harvesting to LULUCFs to greenhouse gas emission savings, so ensuring soil quality is maintained, that the forest sinks is also increased, and that greenhouse gas emissions are lower compared to fossil fuels. And there are also some exceptions from biomass coming from waste and residues, from smaller installations. Sustainability criteria only applies above 7.5 megawatt plants. And also for very big plants, there are some further requirements on their efficiency. But looking at RED 3, so there were several discussions about bioenergy, was one of quite the hot topic of the conversation. And here are some of the key points that change compared to RED 2. On cascading, so the use of wood for energy, we have some stricter provisions, but at the same time, member states can derogate from that in case they need to ensure security of supply, or also if the local industry is not capable, either economically or feasibly, like in a technical way, to use the wood for other purposes. So in this case, we can derogate from the principle. There are some new no-go areas, which are areas where the sourcing is not allowed, and this is based on national legislation. So on a risk-based approach where there is a strong national legislation, and on a more specific approach where there is not such national framework. On sustainable forest management, there were also some stronger wording, but still discretion is left to the local level because forests are quite diversified between different regions, not just countries. And also on the greenhouse gas emission, the threshold was increased. So now all systems will need to reach 80% efficiency. There will be some differentiation. I will not get into the details, but by 2038, all old installations will need to reach this new threshold. And the final point, one of the final points is actually the direct support. So there is a new definition of industrial grade roundwood, which means high quality wood, which of course should be used for long lasting products and not for energy. So this type of feedstock cannot receive no new or renew support, and also for power production. This, and I stress, this is direct support, so it does not affect EU ETS, it does not affect tax rebates or reductions, but it's just subsidies, direct subsidies. And there are also some exceptions here again for BECCS, which is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, so carbon removals, or for remote areas or areas which are under the just transition status. On top of this, there is a new grandfathering clause, which allows plants which are compliant with RED2 to still be eligible for support until 2030, even though they are not yet compliant with RED3. And this is to allow a transitional period for those plants that made changes following RED2, which now will not be compliant with the new target. But the last point I would like to make here was a definition that luckily is not in the final proposal, which is the one of primary woody biomass. And here in the slide, you can see a few pictures, which shows what primary wood is. Because primary wood is not a definition based on quality of the wood, which is something that we strongly support, because high quality sawlogs need to be used for high quality products, not for energy. But this, as you can see here, is wood that is bent, rotten, infested by fungi or other diseases, and therefore is not possible to use for any other industry, which is not the bioenergy sector. And in the proposal, the initial proposal did not take into account what this entitled in terms of market numbers. So we did an internal assessment. Here you can see that bioenergy mostly comes from woody biomass. We do also have some agricultural biomass and waste. But if we look at the woody biomass, primary woody biomass would have accounted between 26 to 36% of the total feedstock, which represent around 15 to 20% of total renewable production in Europe, or 3 to 4% of the total energy consumption. So this was quite a consistent amount of feedstock, and luckily this was then not put in the legislation. Because the proposal initially wanted to not consider this feedstock as renewable, not make it eligible for financial support, and so basically not be accounted for as renewable. As I said, luckily this is not in the deal. But to wrap up, so here you can see, let's say, an overview on the final outcome. I don't know why the slides keep on moving, but it's okay. So we do agree on most of the provisions that were included. Some of them will require some adjustment because, of course, the lower threshold now, because before it was 20 megawatt, now it's 7.5 megawatt. So more operators will need to comply with this. The stricter legislation on cascading will require some legislation on national level. So that will also be how member states implement this. On the no-go areas, that's also good to protect, of course, area highly biodiverse and all-grown forest. So that's a step towards having a more sustainable sourcing. And on forest management practice is also a good step forward to have clear reference and a stronger approach to this. All in all, there could be several files that are important for our sector. I will not spend time today because this will take much longer than 15 minutes. But I take the occasion also to flag an event that we're organizing in Brussels at the end of November. So there we will discuss much more in details about all the things that I briefly touched upon today. And of course, if you want to know more, feel free to reach out to me and stay in touch. Francesca, back to you.
Thank you very much, Irene, really, also for the overview about biomass and what is going on in your sector. It's good also to see that the concept of definition is always coming back. So really, yeah, really interesting. But now there is our last speaker, but with no less importance. We have here with us Sanjeev. So I will just quickly introduce him, passing this slide. And then if you want to take the control, Sanjeev, I will give it to you. So Sanjeev is the head of policy at the European Geothermal Energy Council. He is the founder of Change Partnership, a think tank focused on solving the politics of climate change. Previously, he was advisor to Chris Davies, MEP, chair of the PEC committee in the European Parliament, director at Burson Cohn and Wolfer, and senior associate at E3G, ETS coordinator at the WWF office and business affair manager at the Energy Institute in UK. He read history at the Queen Mary University of London. So yeah, thank you very much for being here, Sanjeev. The floor is yours for the last presentation.
Thank you very much for a kind introduction, and thank you to my colleagues for a really fascinating and rich series of presentations. A lot of information has already been said, so in the interest of our viewers, I'm going to skip over the bit so we go into new and fresh content. What I will do is break my intervention into two parts. Firstly, just to explain a little bit about geothermal. It may be a new and familiar technology for some of our viewers, and then to deep dive into what the package has delivered for us, and ultimately what are the missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. So geothermal covers a whole variety of applications, from baseload electricity, heating, cooling, seasonal storage. In some instances, we also produce lithium, and in fact, one of our plants in Iceland has just found gold, so we're able to extract lots of things very, very sustainably. Principally in the heat pump space, our geothermal is the energy that's stored below the surface of the earth. So we do large buildings when it comes to heating. For example, in the heat pump space, we have the NATO headquarters, the Bundestag in Germany, and of course the famous St. Patrick's Church in New York, where you have the parade for St. Patrick's Day every year. There are different types of heat pump applications, from closed loop systems to open loop, where you have slightly higher temperatures because you're using underground aquifers. And there's about 2 million, over 2 million heat pumps that are installed, geothermal heat pumps that are installed across Europe. And our kind of leading markets are Sweden, France, and Germany at the moment. Two quick things. Because everything is below ground and out of sight and out of mind, we have a very high impact. We score very, very highly in terms of environmental benefits. And there's a link here to an article with some of the civil society organisations, environmental conservationists, who are very, very supportive of the least impact in terms of environment. And of course, there's a commercial benefit to geothermal heat pumps. In Sweden, a property agency surveyed houses, and they found that those with geothermal heat pumps sold for 10,000 to 12,000 euros more than those that didn't. In terms of district heating applications, ADIME, the French Energy and Environment Agency, found that the levelized cost of geothermal, so this is the production of geothermal wells, but also the infrastructure to heating, was 15 euros per megawatt hour, compared to gas, which is providing the same service at the same volume for 51 euros. So geothermal is competitive because of the long lifespans that we operate under. Heat pumps normally have a lifespan of 50 years. District heating, we're looking at beyond 50 years, same for power generation as well. One of the things I want to highlight here is, and this is quite an important thing because it's one of the things we want to have translated into policy, is one of the developments that we see within the geothermal space is looking for business models that don't rely on subsidies. So we've been focused quite a lot on a heat as a service, and particular heat purchase agreements. There's a very good example in Villers-Villecabe, which is a suburb of Paris. About over 1 million people in the Paris region are supplied through geothermal district heating. But this is quite an innovative technology. You'll recognise this from the slide that Greg had earlier on in our session when he talked about the multi-phase drains. So this has allowed 30% additional heat to be put into the heating system. The key thing about this is that this was a district heating scheme that was designed and constructed and operational within 2 years. And this is bringing together local authorities over a long-term contract. That long-term contract gives ultimate control to the local authority, but it creates a public-private company which is managing the supply of heating and cooling. So this is the kind of business model that we want to look at. So we're moving away from subsidies, much more to service and valorization over a long period of time. And what's happening now across France is that there's lots of initiatives which allow for heat purchase agreements to grow, which are also allowing lots of smaller local authorities to kind of combine together to create a bigger project. And this is something we'd like to see replicated across other parts of Europe. So, excuse me, we also have cogeneration, so both the supply of heating and cooling, and sometimes we have trigeneration where you have heating, cooling, and lithium extraction. 2 examples here, but the key one is to look at Munich. So Munich, you have the first large-scale application of district cooling. And this talks to the system efficiency observations that we've heard, especially on the chat as well, in terms of electricity consumption. So cooling is increasingly going to become an issue. My colleagues and myself are going to talk a lot about heating, but let's not forget cooling when we look at the overall dynamic in the energy mix. The key thing to learn here is that Stadtwerke and Munich, because they were so concerned with inefficient cooling systems and applications being brought in different parts of their system, and that this was causing an immense strain on their power sector, they've actually rolled out a large district cooling system, which has effectively reduced electricity consumption by 70%. This, again, is one of the aspects that we would like to see replicated in the Fit for 55 package, but also the implementation phase as we go forward. One of the other aspects that we see quite a lot of, and this helps the kind of socially inclusive energy transition, is really legacy fossils. And we have 2 examples here. Let me give you an example of Herlen, which is in the Netherlands, because again, this is a combination of a heat purchase agreement, local authorities, but also how we see the future of the growth of renewable heating networks. So Herlen was a famous coal mining part of the Limburg region in the Netherlands. There was a plan to reflood the mines. There was very high temperature below ground, and that was enough to supply local authority offices. Once that was successfully developed, the project developer then started to look at nearby residencies, and then they're building modules and modules and modules to effectively use a combination of deep geothermal with geothermal heat pumps and other sources to create a heat network which can gradually expand out across the whole of the town and city. Again, this is a bottom-up organic growth, but this is one of the things that we wanted to see replicated in the package. Asturias is a similar activity in Spain. Asturias is iconically the coal heartland of Spain. So again, we collectively are solving the socio-economic aspects of the energy transition, of which heat is the critical factor for citizens. We also provide baseload electricity in 10 member states at present within the EU, and then of course neighbourhood countries. We provide 1% of final electricity consumption, and we are looking to be at 5% by the end of this decade. To put that in context, in 2020, from Eurostat data, the solar PV sector provided 5% of electricity consumption. So we're behind the curve. We need to accelerate. The key thing about geothermal electricity, as with all geothermal applications, is that it's baseload. And therefore that means we have a high capacity factor. So for every 1 megawatt that's installed, you get a lot of energy that comes from it. And you can see from this graph at the bottom, but it's too difficult to read on screen. The average capacity factor for geothermal power is 80%. Only nuclear comes close, and then you have other technologies below ground. Now, the other thing that's been mentioned very briefly by our colleague Severo is on storage. There's a really good study from the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, which is looking at underground thermal storage and aquifer thermal storage, and they basically concluded that it was just one US cent in terms of the economic efficiency. The other important thing is that because everything is stored below ground, you don't take up huge amounts of land that would be locked into hydrogen or batteries. And in this one case in the US, Canada, they found that you would save over 9,000 kilometers of land just by looking at underground storage. And I kind of mentioned the cooling load already. Okay, so you kind of get an idea of what geothermal is. Let's go through what we really wanted. Now, I've kind of given you a few indications already, but we were really very keen on making sure that there's some form of a mandate for local authorities to zone the regions within their localities for renewables. We know that, you know, as we're seeing from lots of member states who are kind of new to geothermal, this is an example of Charleroi, which is in Belgium, in the southern part of Belgium, that once member states start to think through it, what are the local resources, sooner or later they will discover their geological surveys, and they'll get a good idea of where you have the very deep geothermal resources and where you have the not so deep resources, and the spaces where kind of closed loop heat pumps can play a really strong part. And you get to see this kind of zoning done, which gives us a lot more visibility in terms of where we need to be targeting our growth, but also identifying very clearly from this where we can install and where we cannot install. So this is quite an important thing, and we're quite glad that this was picked up by the policymakers. The second trend that we're seeing now is a lot of member states are getting serious about geothermal as they start to look at climate neutrality. We have national action plans in France, Poland, Germany. Ireland has a strategy consultation, and they're going to start the legislation process after the summer holidays. The Netherlands has a hybrid heat pump rollout plan based on a ban of fossil boilers from 2026. So this is hybrid, but it's also open to both our colleagues, our cousins in the air source space, but also in the geothermal space as well. We have countries like Slovakia who are brand new to the geothermal area, looking at the very first cogeneration plant. Slovakia, Croatia, Hungary, really big players that are moving into the geothermal space at a national level to complement the action that's happening below ground. And then the other trend that we're seeing is that a lot of the agri-food and industrial sectors are now starting to look towards geothermal to effectively either want to address their energy needs, but also to look at the cost-effective supplies of energy, so you don't have the volatility of being dependent on fossils. So in the Netherlands, for example, greenhouses, those that produce food, but also those that produce flowers, have been looking and have actually been working together to enter into legal contracts, heat purchase agreements, to build district heating, but not for houses, for their agricultural food production. You see a lot of this in Italy, for example. We're going to celebrate our 25th anniversary in a couple of weeks. And in Tuscany, in Italy, Enel's geothermal power plant also supplies the local district heating networks. One of that is a cheese maker and a beer producer. So you have geothermal alcohol, geothermal cheese, if you're interested in those kind of things, to celebrate. To move on to the next stage, and this is really an important trend that we started to see over the last 4 or 5 years, where in urban centres, project developers are drilling deeper than they drilled before for a conventional heat system. So instead of looking at an individual residency, they're looking at pooling large blocks together. So here you see an example in Finland, in Puso, apologies if I've mispronounced that. But again, this is a really dynamic project. We see this replicated all over, but this is how you can start to build heat networks, a zonal activity rather than the big district systems. And we expect this to be a key driver in countries where you're looking at kind of aggregating demand and helping citizens and communities move in one instance rather than relying just on the kind of conventional subsidies and information to prod householders to make the investments themselves. So you've kind of got an idea of what the trends are in the geothermal space. This is what we were looking for in terms of policy solutions from the Fit for 55 package. Firstly, we wanted to reduce the overall capital cost. We are an expensive technology, but we provide multiple services. So it's good value for money over a very long term. So we need to find a way in which we can bring down the cost of capital through policy. Permitting, for us, zoning is a crucial issue. We our sector is based upon maps and looking at geology, but also where one can drill and where one cannot drill. So we were very keen on having a traffic light system for permitting, and we're very delighted that that was adopted by the policymakers. I've just heard some terrible news just a few minutes ago that the Renewable Energy Directive will not be discussed today in council. That meeting has been stalled. So, you know, there's going to be some really terrible politics coming in the last minute, but there's really, really good things that have come out of this one. In terms of business models, I mentioned before, heat purchase agreements. We're also looking at ways in which we can address risk and also to find high temperature resources, so that the higher the temperature, the more you can use them for much larger heating needs, but also power generation and cooling as well. And then last but not least, geothermal is kind of one of those technologies which nobody really knows about. Statistically, we're lost a lot of time in other sectors. So we're very desperately keen to get a mention of geothermal, even the smallest reference to it in any legislation, but also in kind of communications from our politicians. We're starting to see think tanks and the kind of wider community starting to look at geothermal much better than they have before. This is my last slide, and it's within this that I kind of want to go through what we've delivered in the 4 areas that were quite crucial for us. So market creation, permitting, electricity and finance. Electricity is mentioned here because, of course, we talk a lot about electrifying heat, and to do that you need to have abundant supplies of renewable electricity. So that's one of the spaces that we play into. But in terms of market creation, we have a de facto target to triple the capacity of solar. This was placed in the EU solar strategy. Sorry, to triple the capacity of geothermal. This was placed in the EU solar strategy for convenience sake, but it's there, and we're now working through with member states on how to actually start to deliver this one. We wanted to have some form of a target for heat pumps. We're very happy that in the Repower Europe, there's a focus on EU on hydronic heat pumps. So this is our cousin Josephine's ambient heat pumps, but it's also geothermal heat pumps as well. So we're looking at heating up water within the residential buildings. It's quite a crucial thing for us. We are very supportive of the heat pump accelerator. We are part of the heat pump sector. So, like Josephine, we're very excited, and we really appreciate the excellent work that she and her team have been leading on. We were very keen on the local authority mandate, as you can see from the example in Charleroi. We really want this replicated across. There's 2 things to note in Article 23 of the RED and Article 23 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. There is a slight tweak in the local authority planning. The local authority planning in ED is focused on local energy resources. In the RED, it's local renewable energy resources. That's one of the things that we want to try and help develop with member states. Again, as Severa mentioned, the binding renewable heating with target is an essential stepping stone to making heating and cooling take a much more serious politically, but also forcing member states to really start to grapple with it, because in the past the attention hasn't really materialised in the way in which we wanted to. We're delighted that there's a higher RED target, and more importantly, that there's a carbon price on heating that Josephine mentioned earlier on. It's very important for this in residential buildings, but what we're also seeing a lot in our sector is commercial buildings moving towards geothermal, and the cost of heating and the service that's provided to commercial customers who are demanding much more sustainable buildings is actually helping us. So in the case of Belgium, whenever you see a new commercial property being developed or renovated, you effectively flatten the old one, put in a geothermal system, and then build it back up. And there's a lot of these across the wonderful streets of Brussels, but it's something that we're seeing a lot in France as well, and many other countries that are looking to bigger buildings. Permitting, as I mentioned already, the go-to areas, we absolutely love this. It's almost a kind of pace the traffic light system that we've been advocating for some time. So we appreciate this. There's a specific act on heat pumps to accelerate the permitting process just for 18 months, which was agreed by council. So it's all the governments coming together and saying, okay, we really need to take heat pumps seriously, and they look at air source heat pumps, ambient heat pumps, and also geothermal ones in particular as well. For us, permitting is more of an issue than it is so for others. We're very happy that geothermal, the entire scope of geothermal is mentioned in the Net Zero Industry Act, or NZIA for short, and in particular within the Critical Raw Materials Act, where lithium plays a big part, there is a specific focus on drilling. Oh, sorry, there's a specific focus on exploration campaigns, and we're hoping that that becomes much more specific to focus on drilling. So this allows us to get those a better understanding of the geology, where the high temperature, what the shape of the high temperature resources below ground are, which means that you de-risk the drilling process altogether. And last but not least, the digitalization of the permitting process. This has been something the industry's been asking for absolute ages. It's finally in there across all the different directives from RED, NGO and CRMA, and it absolutely needs to stay there. We have horror stories of applications, trees being chopped down just to produce an application, which then takes 7 years to be signed off. It's just not efficient for anybody's sake. We're very happy that the electricity market design granted geothermal accessibility to two-way contracts for difference. This will help a lot of the growth that we're going to see over the coming years in new countries entering into the geothermal electricity space. We're glad that flexibility was mentioned. I think the reward systems, flexibility and storage are also included within the electricity directive. This is where you get an overlap between the EMD and the heat-related aspects of the Fit for 55 package. And it's definitely something that I recommend we keep an eye on, because there should be a lot of opportunities for many of us along the road. In terms of finance, again, two-way contracts of difference is very good. Article 23 of the Renewable Energy Directive mentions both the risk mitigation framework, but only at a national level, as well as heat purchase agreements. And really the bulk of our work now is to Europeanize as much as possible these, so that we raise awareness around them. But also, in particular, we start to target some of the key end users. So a lot of the kind of conventional discussion around heating focuses on, buildings, commercial, residential, very important sector. And it's crucial to the inclusivity and the justice around the energy transition. But we also need to be looking a lot more at agriculture, at manufacturing industry, certainly the low to medium temperature parts of that. So this is one of the things that we want to see a lot more developed. There will also be indicative targets, which I believe Severo mentioned in his presentation, but we really need to flesh them out, because those targets are much too focused on hydrogen in particular. And the last thing is that we wanted to get additional valorization for our byproducts. As I mentioned before, we have a sustainable extraction of minerals, and we're glad that that's been kind of recognised in both the EMD, the Renewable Energy Directive, and the Critical Raw Materials Act. So there's a lot that came out from the package. It's going to kind of help geothermal grow, but we're still missing, and we're missing it so much, I didn't even put it on the slide deck because it hurts. We're still missing that political visibility. And that's something that we as a sector will need to work on. And maybe if I have a question for the audience, if there's kind of ideas that you have in terms of how we can better engage with think tanks, with civil society, so that they get a better understanding of the value of the different services geothermal provides. So this will help to give us that visibility and the stature alongside our cousins in the remainder of the renewable energy sector. So that's my slide deck. I'm looking forward to the discussion that we have afterwards. Over to you, Francesca.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. I think that your presentation completed the overview of our renewable heating and cooling technologies and solutions. So I will just give the floor to Greg to moderate the panel discussion. I know that we don't have a lot of time, and but I mean, I think that we can maybe stay for 10-15 minutes to answer a couple of, or also more, of questions. So please, Greg, go on.
Thank you very much. Yep. Well, I'm going to have the privilege of maybe asking the first question as a moderator. It's one that came up to me as I was hearing from, I think, especially Josephine, Irene, and also Andras. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in our discussion. We're under the renewable energy sector, and also anyone involved in heating and cooling is looking at two different timelines. There's one which is going to say we're going to be phasing out fossil fuels from individual heating systems in buildings. And then on the other hand, you've got a requirement to phase out the fossil input into efficient district heating networks. So just had a, first of all, kind of clarification question to Josephine. You talked about this loophole. So as I understand it, you cannot from 2035 or maybe up to 2040 in an existing building run a fossil heating system described as that. If you run a so-called hybrid heating system, then if you run it off fossil fuels, you can carry on doing so up until 2050. So if you could just let me know whether my understanding of that is correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then I suppose my question then to Andras is, you presented a timeline for how we've got to slowly decarbonize district heating networks. And do you feel that there is good equivalence between what's being asked of you for efficient district heating networks and what you see is coming down the pipeline from EPBD for individual heating systems?
Okay, so first on your question, well, to be very clear, so the trilogues will start soon, and this loophole, as I called it, it's in the position of the Parliament. So this is not included in the position of the Commission and of the Council, so it's not yet final, of course, so it's very important that this is not adopted during the trilogues, because so what it says is, yeah, it actually allows, how do you say, fossil fuel boilers not to be called fossil fuel boilers if they are certified to run on renewable fuels. It doesn't say that they should run on renewable fuels. It says that they should be certified to run on renewable fuels. So this opens really the door to, yeah, to say it very simple, a sticker on your fossil fuel boiler and say some date in the future this will be ready to run on renewable fuels, and then you could keep using it. So this is for us, yeah, it's a different thing when you say, okay, it should a boiler that runs on renewable fuels, that's another thing. But if you say it's certified too, it really opens, yeah, a box to just keep installing current boilers with some type of label or some type of, yeah, thing. And there were no further conditions. So yeah, this is a bit a risky, or how to say, slippery slope if we would go that way.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Indeed, we see some mismatches between the definitions in EED, between the alternative definition based on CO2 emissions and also the definition of efficient district heating and cooling. The timelines are not completely matching, and the percentages are not so smoothly increasing as they do in the alternative efficient district heating and cooling definition. And we also see that in EPBD, as Josephine highlighted, the hybrid boilers could allow fossil fuels and the current business as usual to be continued, while for DHC there is like a end stop of new fossil fuel installations after 2030 to be classified as efficient district heating and cooling. So to answer your question, we see the differences, and we think that district heating and cooling also needs time to decarbonize its risks. So this is one of our positions from EPBD, that we would like efficient district heating to be allowed to connect it to zero emission buildings, which will be decarbonized, of course, in its own time, because district heatings are huge, robust infrastructures, and they, similarly to the electricity grids, we need time to decarbonize the DHC grid as well.
Thanks very much for the answers. Have another question, which is more about, I think it's probably more directed to Saverio, Andras again, and then perhaps also Sanjeev can come in, because you covered this a lot in your last few slides. We're under this, I mean, not we, but Europe has put itself under the obligation that municipalities of 45,000 should come up with heating and cooling assessments. And I was wondering what you felt about that size. Do you feel that that is the right kind of size of municipality in which to come up with this kind of detailed assessment? Should it be bigger? Should it be smaller? Sanjeev, do you feel that with your example of Charleroi, we're actually, I mean, perhaps it seems a bit on the small side, and you want municipalities to be grouping together more to come up with a more integrated plan?
Okay, well, thank you. Maybe I can start off a response, and our colleagues can jump in. Yes, I mean, originally we would like to see much smaller regions. Just to give you an example, Litomorse in the Czech Republic is a population of about 140,000, so it's a very, very small region in comparison to the 45,000 threshold. They've already joined up. They've already produced a decarbonisation plan to kind of get off of gas as quickly as they possibly can. This has been around for 5 or 6 years, and the issue with the smaller regions is that they find it much more harder to get access to funding, to the technical expertise that's needed, and these generally tend to be slightly poorer regions than the bigger ones. By definition, the bigger ones are going to have much more wealth associated, much more wealthy population. So there is a social justice element around who does these plans, but the plans themselves are one thing. We actually need to make sure that they're investment grade, so that you actually turn these turn these plans into real concrete changes on the ground. Now, the example I would give that really illustrates kind of what we want to look at is Szeged. So Szeged is in southern Hungary. It's a historic town. It's a beautiful university region. And there the issue was to prove the concept. Could you actually do heat decarbonisation? This is Hungary, which has historically been a country where it gets the vast bulk of its heating from fossils. Now, they had a lot of uphill struggles, and some of the big commercial international banks were reluctant to take a risk on the geothermal technologies, but the university itself took on the risk. They said, okay, we'll do it with 2 of our university facilities, and then what they've done is the municipal government on the back of that said, well, okay, we know this works, and they started to go circuit by circuit across their district heating system to do that. So I think the issue is not just the size of the local authority, but the capacity that they have to actually do the heating planning, but more importantly, to make that heating planning investment grade. That's really the crucial thing that we as a community have to work together to support all of these local authorities, because it's got to be something that you can put money behind. But I pass over to Severo and Andreas for more insights.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll go first, Andras, or you don't mind. Yeah, just a quick mention. Indeed, the threshold, it would have been nice to have it lower, but it's not the only thing. And here, just to complement what Sanjeev was saying, it came to my mind, like for us, it's also key that there are synergies between the national and the local level. What I mean is a bit complementary to what Sanjeev was saying. Local authorities need to be empowered to put in place these local heating and cooling plans. And what I mean is, there is a case that we were discussing also during a recent webinar on Monday by another project, Cooling Down, and they were a speaker was presenting the case of Valencia, where they have this CITE project, and what they do there is, because local heating and cooling is a very local matter, to have national data is relevant, but to a certain extent. So what you need to do is to promote synergies between the national data, which can provide the overview and the bigger picture, and then data that are gathered at the local level. But to do so, of course, you need first the member states to put those data, because the case of Valencia, Spain is one of the countries that hasn't published the update of the comprehensive assessments. So if you don't have the overview in the first place, it's already a bit of a problem, because it shows lack of interest from member states to provide data on heating and cooling. And then local authorities need to receive financial resources, skilled workforce, all the necessary resources to put in place to map their local heating demand, to map their local heating and cooling resources, and to put it into a comprehensive strategy to meet this demand. So we need synergies, and local authorities really need to be empowered to have successful heating and cooling plans. Otherwise, it would stay there like an empty provision.
Indeed, just to complete the picture, I completely agree with Sanjeev and Saverio. But we were also advocating for a lower threshold, around 30,000 population for municipalities. And we don't see an issue only with the threshold, but also that's the measures included in these assessments are not mandatory. So we see an example from Germany that where these heating and cooling plans are also mandatory to implement. It's a huge increase in the deployment of utilization of locally available renewable and waste heat sources. So that would be one option, how to further improve the Fit for 55 package.
Greg, do you mind if I throw a grenade into this conversation for a second? Look, the one thing we haven't talked about is the gas package. Now, a lot of the heating and cooling that we have at municipal level is as Andreas has just mentioned, is the responsibility of local governments. A lot of time they outsource that to distribution system operators. So if we live in Brussels, all the communes in Brussels have basically outsourced this to a company called Sibelga. So they're responsible for our electricity system, but also our heating system as well. Now, this is where the conflict is going to come with the local authorities, because you have different communes that are always producing kind of their visions. You have Brussels Environment, which has a vision for how it wants to decarbonise, but they have to grapple with this DSO body, which is predominantly regulated under the gas package, and that's the missing piece of this of the entire Fit for 55 discussion. This is that we had a conversation on heat in one place, but the bulk of the heat is coming from fossil gas, and that was dealt with externally from it. So we've got to find a way to integrate it, because I can see a lot of resistance to system inertia driving and blocking some of the actions that we need to see forward. So again, the legislation is just one thing. We have a responsibility as a community to keep on making sure that this is implemented, and to help those local authorities who are going to be blocked by DSO saying, well, actually, we don't want to change too much, or it's too expensive, or it's too complicated. We have a lot of work to do. Legislation is not the end, it's the start.
Thanks very much. I don't know if anyone wants to react to that. If not, I would have maybe just one last question to Irene. And so, Irene, I mean, you spent quite a lot of your presentation talking about how there was you had to fight a rearguard action in the European Parliament about overzealous interpretations of what kind of biomass could be used for bioenergy. And maybe you could shed some light on why it is that people have certain conceptions about what the bioresource should be used for, and some things are included in those ideas and other things are not. And then also where your organization's position is on things like the part of the heat market that bioenergy should address. So we've heard from Sanjeev and we've heard from Saverio that there's great interest in looking at low temperature heat from combinations of, let's say, heat pumps and geothermal on the one hand, or with solar thermal directly on the other. Does that mean that in bioenergy we should be thinking more about high temperature applications? So some thoughts on you about the right way to address different segments of the heat demand, perhaps, for bioenergy.
So thank you, Greg, for the questions. I could speak for 1 hour about this, but I will try to stick to 5 minutes since we are already a bit over time. So I will start with your first question about the reputation or the image of the bioenergy sector, because it's true that I think there is a lot of misunderstanding or lack of awareness of how the sector works. And if I have to pick one myth, which is probably the one that we hear the most about bioenergy, is that this causes deforestation. And that's absolutely not true. First of all, and this is the first point I would like to make, is wood is not harvested for energy in first place. We do have several industries which are working on wood. I'm thinking about construction materials, furniture, pulp and paper, panel board. That's so many other industries that use wood as a first raw material. So most of the harvesting, it comes from those industries, and then just afterwards, or the residues, which are not good quality, then those are used for bioenergy. And if we look at data, I will not spend too much time on this, but the harvesting of wood throughout the last 20 years has been pretty much stable. It's 20% of the total feedstock. And bioenergy instead has tripled in the last 20 years. So as you can see, there is no direct correlation between the wood that we take from the forest and the increase of bioenergy. It's rather that we use residues and that the systems are getting more and more efficient. So this, for me, is the very first point to mention. On top of this, but this again, I could spend like very long time talking about this, is if you actively manage the forest in a sustainable way. So of course, we're not talking about plantation forests, but replanting a diversified series of trees and species. This can even improve biodiversity and also make forests more resilient to climate change. Because nowadays we've seen this, I mean, I'm in Italy right now, we have floods coming up mid-May. That's really not normal. Climate change is changing the landscape, and forests are not adapted to that yet. So they also need to evolve, and the way of making this process faster is to diversify the species. So again, not doing a plantation, but having different set of trees that could be more resilient to climate change. And to go back to your second question, also because indeed I don't want to jeopardize the meeting now, going to where we see the potential for bioenergy, that's a very good question. We do see this in several sectors because bioenergy is very diversified. As I mentioned before, the main market is still the residential one, but where we do see quite a potential is for sure in industrial sector, as you mentioned, because bioenergy can easily go up to 500 degrees and 160 bar pressure. So those temperature and conditions are quite needed for industries, not just for low temperature one. And on top of this, we do see also hard-to-abate sectors such as like the cement or steel industry. They are looking also at using biomass, not just as an energy, but also as a feedstock, so torrefied biomass to replace their carbon content. So there are several options there. And one last point that was also mentioned in the chat is that indeed we will have more and more renewables, both in the power and the heating sector, but most of them are intermittent, while bioenergy is quite a stable one. So it can also work as a base load for intermittent renewables, can be combined with several of them, solar thermal, sort of solar photovoltaic, heat pumps. You can have districts which put both together. And you can still have a stable load, which can also complement a peak load or stabilize the grid. So this is to give a few food for thought, but again, I don't want to take too much time. So back to you, maybe Greg, but if you have other questions, I'm happy to dig further on some of the issues.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm conscious of the time as well, so I'm looking to Francesca for the way forward.
Yeah, I'm really sorry because I think the conversation could be on for some more times, but we are already a little bit on late, so I will go to the closing. And before I really thanks all the speakers, thank you for joining us, for your presentation, for answering the question and taking the time to share your knowledges with us in this space. Thanks to all the participants to stay with us until now. So just moving towards the ends of the events, thank you for following us. If you have found this information useful and you want to stay updated with the project REDI4Heat, please follow us on social media. We have LinkedIn, Twitter, we have the website, an info email if you want to contact us. And yes, and if you want also to participate to more events like this one of today, we at the European Heat Pump Association, we organize a lot of webinars and the workshop on many different topics. So you can find everything on our social media or website. So feel free to check it out. And the majority are online, sometimes also in person. But if you miss them, you can find the recording on YouTube. And thank you also to my colleagues Irene, who supported me today. And yeah, thank you very much again to the participants and to be present during the discussion. We hope to see you very soon to another event. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.